Good evening. It's wonderful to have such a great crowd tonight. I'm Doug Shackelford. I'm the Dean of UNC Keenan-Flagler, and welcome to tonight's lecture. This is our second event in the Dean Speaker Series for this academic year. The Dean Speaker Series was created to bring to campus outstanding scholars and leaders to share thoughts and insights within UNC Keenan-Flagler, the university, and the community at large. The series is sponsored by a gift from the Archie K. Davis Foundation. At the conclusion of this evening's lecture, Jana Rady, Associate Dean of the Master of Accounting Program, Associate Professor and EY Scholar in Accounting, will deliver a vote of thanks to our speaker on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students. Also, I would like to mention two other speakers we will be hosting in coming months. On February 2nd, former Maine Senator Olympia Snowe will deliver this year's Weatherspoon Lecture. 2 weeks later, we will welcome Tim Belk, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Belk, and a 1981 MBA graduate of the Business School. Tim will be our final Dean Speaker for this academic year. You can look for more details and registration information for both of those events to come your way in the coming weeks. Now I'm happy to welcome to UNC Keenan-Flagler, Sherron Watkins. Sherron is the former Vice President of Enron Corporation. She alerted then CEO Ken Lay in August of 2001 to accounting irregularities within the company. She testified before congressional committees from the House and Senate investigating Enron's demise. She has been lauded for her courageous actions, and Time magazine named her as one of their 3 2002 Persons of the Year. In recognition of her outstanding demonstration of ethics in the workplace, she has received numerous honors, including the National Academy of Management's Distinguished Executive Award. The Women's Economic Roundtable presented her with the Roth Award for educating the public about business and finance. She is the co-author of Power Failure, the inside story of the collapse of Enron. Prior to joining Enron, she worked as portfolio manager of MG Trade Finance Corporation and for 8 years at Arthur Andersen in New York and Houston. Sherron is a certified public accountant, holds a master's in professional accounting as well as a bachelor's in accounting and business from the University of Texas at Austin. The topic of her speech this evening is Lessons from the Collapse of Enron and the Complexity of Whistleblowing. Please join me in giving a warm Carolina welcome to Sherron Watkins.
Thank you very much. I really like this auditorium too. It's, it feels nice and close in. I can see y'all. I'm going to probably present some Enron materials for about 35 minutes, but I'm hoping that we have some lively question and answer time. It's 2015. Enron collapsed in 2001. I just changed my description of whistleblowing to complexity of whistleblowing versus the toxicity of whistleblowing. And there's now really a bright spot in this country with what's happened with some protections for whistleblowing. So I am going to go into sort of what happened at Enron, the lessons learned, but I'm going to spend some time on where the whistleblower protections have been in this country and the new developments, because I think it is helpful. Enron's now just the byword for corporate scandal, but really, the people that got caught up in the problems at Enron, most of them did not mean to commit securities fraud violations. They didn't mean to cross that line. So to me, it's important to speak to college students because I want to put the warnings out there. You do have to pay attention to the small steps in the wrong direction because you could find yourself in a situation similar to Enron. We were called the most innovative company in America for 7 years in a row by Fortune magazine. That's our 2 towers in Houston and then one of our 7 trading floors. We had started life as the merger of 2 very large regulated natural gas pipeline companies, but we had morphed into what people call the Wall Street of energy trading. We handled about 25% of the country's energy transactions, both financially and physically. And our business executives like Jeff Skilling like to brag that we were, what was making up our bottom line profit today was businesses we weren't in 20 years ago. And we're going to get even faster at innovation. And in 10 years, most of our bottom line income will be coming from even new businesses that we haven't been in. The problem with sort of innovation is the dark side of pushing your employees that much, is fraud. We got pushed to the point of crossing lines. I put the stock price chart up here mainly to point out, when it grows that much and you have a stock split, you kind of focus towards the end. But I began working at Enron in '93, where you see our stock prices at $10. 3 years later in '96, we're at 20. 3 years later at '99, we're hovering at 40, and then we go up to 90. Well, Enron compensated us with employee stock ownership plans, stock grants, and stock options. When you contributed to your 401k plan, the company's match was in Enron stock. So you might be a person that always follows the guidelines, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. I was sort of like that. My 401k contribution was always put in like a Vanguard S&P index fund. I did not put my contribution in Enron stock. But the company matched by matching it with Enron stock. It builds goodwill when the stock price is going up like this. You're able to sell stock options and you make more money than you ever thought you would. You open up your retirement quarterly statement and it looks, healthier and bigger than you thought it was going to be. It makes you feel good about the company. Problems usually happen in successful times. In classes, sometimes I'll use the Columbia Accident Investigation Report as sort of a starting point to what happened at NASA with losing 2 shuttles, but particularly the Columbia foam strike. They had had foam fall off the rocket and hit the shuttle in the past, and it had not caused problems. There was an engineer very concerned that this foam strike that happened in 2003 was frozen, larger, denser, hit a vulnerable part of the left wing. But what prevented the whole organization at NASA from doing further work, they had talked about turning military satellites from looking at the Earth to looking at the space shuttle as it went overhead. But foam strikes hadn't caused problems in the past, and someone said, I don't want to be a Chicken Little on this and incur costs for no good reason. And we lost a shuttle as a result. So you've got to be careful that your prior success makes you ignore warning signs. I live in Houston, Texas, where our primary driver is oil and gas industry. The BP oil spill was quite a big deal in Houston. The people working on it were based in Houston. Drilling in the Gulf got shut down until it was understood what had happened. But if you really look at the articles, they had high pressure readings, they had alarm bells going off, and what your protocol is to go ahead and launch your blowout preventer. And that's heavy equipment that chops off the well. It kills it. You're going to just flush, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment down the tubes, but all of those warning bells mean that's what you need to do to prevent an oil spill. Well, the litigation around BP, they had folks operating going, wow, that alarm bell's going off. That hasn't ever happened before. They were hesitant to do what they were supposed to do because disaster had never happened. Part of my discussions at leadership conferences, you do have to plan for disaster and be disciplined to follow that. Be careful of success. Enron had just had so much success. The board of directors said that they kind of began to lose their skepticism because the market kept rewarding our behavior. We must be doing something right. Here is a listing of the executives that sold over $1 billion of Enron stock in the last 2 years of the company's existence. Now, the whole decade of 2000s has been sort of a decade of corporate scandal. But when Enron first collapsed, this was kind of new news, that a company that had had a market cap of $60 billion at the beginning of 2001 was now declaring bankruptcy, appearing that shareholders were going to get nothing, and they didn't get anything. Yet the people who had been running the company were not going to be poor. They weren't going to be selling their homes. They weren't going to be selling their cars. They had sold, lots of stock options in the run-up to Enron's collapse. Now, this was just repeated with WorldCom, with Adelphia, with HealthSouth, and then in 2008 with Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch and Citibank and Chase. But back in 2001, this angered a lot of people. We had over 24 shareholder lawsuits, 13 congressional investigations. There was a special Enron task force that was pulled from around the country, SEC folks, Department of Justice, and FBI, to investigate civil and criminal violations from Enron's executives. The California folks started looking into the trading aspects in their state. And then finally, Enron's board kind of woke up to what's going on. Why is there so much negative press all of a sudden about Enron? Why is our stock price declining? And they hired Bill Powers, who was dean of the UT Law School, and hired outside lawyers and accountants, Deloitte & Touche and Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, to investigate really my concerns. Now, I have a whole slide about the Powers report because it was really a godsend to me. I had been at Enron for 8 years. You actually have 20 years of corporate work history. Arthur Andersen for 8 years, Mattel Gesellschaft, and Enron. And everyone knows Arthur Andersen is no more because of their flawed audits at Enron. Enron obviously is no more, but MG Trade Finance, Mattel Gesellschaft, was a 125-year-old German company that was brought down by a $1.3 billion oil trading scandal that happened in New York City in 1993. Deutsche Bank took them over. They're no more. So I was meeting with students earlier. I'm a CPA. I'm kind of risk adverse. I never went to work for a startup company.
Who do you work for now?
I'm on my own. So, that's the better thing. But, I never imagined that these big companies I went to work for, would be no more. And not because someone bought them, but they blew up in disgrace. There's no reference checking on my resume. There's no one to call. No one absorbed those companies. But it's kind of sad. It does make me kind of cautionary. I am here to talk about what the warning signs are. But people ask me, why did you go to Kinley? There's a book by Adam Grant, and I guess he used to be a professor here. He wrote Give and Take. He has a chapter on Kinley, that Kinley is actually a taker disguised as a giver. And I read his chapter, and I was just really amazed at the insights that he has. And I think they really are spot on. I thought Kinley was a different person. Jeff Skilling had been at the company for 10 years. I was initially hired in his division. In 97, he made chief operating officer. In the year 2001, in January, he made CEO. He'd been striving for that spot, and he abruptly quits mid-August 2001, 8 months into the job. I had stumbled across this fraud 2 weeks prior to Skilling quitting. I met with some students earlier this afternoon, and they asked, did you sort of see this coming over time? How did you discover this? It was your typical fraud detection, where a employee switches positions, and says, hey, what's this elephant doing in the room? You find this fraud. I don't want to go into too much of the specifics, but I was put in charge of a list of assets. There were about 12 investments that were hedged with entities called the Raptors. There were 4 Raptors, and there was just a loss on the spreadsheet that made no sense to me. And when I kept asking and asking about these structures, I did not get good answers. I was discovered that the Raptors had no outside investors, no third-party money was at risk. They had an ability through some puts and calls to get their hands on Enron stock. So these Raptors owed Enron about $700 million. When they were going to pay Enron, they were going to stick their hand in Enron's pocket, grab out some stock, sell it in the marketplace, and pay Enron back. Well, I hadn't practiced accounting in 10 years, but, it just doesn't get that creative, that you can just come up with some complicated structures and do business with yourself. But in meeting with Ken Lay, I felt like I had credibility because I know why Jeff Skilling's quitting. You know, I gave him memos, I gave him an Excel spreadsheet, a PowerPoint document, but, you know, I was claiming that Arthur Andersen had failed in their audit and the lawyers had failed in their work. But why do you have a CEO quitting for no good reason? Well, these things are going to blow up in 2 years, and he wanted to be far removed from it. I use the Titanic example. I'm just the crew member saying, we've hit an iceberg. You know, send your experts down to the bottom of the ship. I think you'll see that so much water's pouring in, we're going to sink. Well, it never dawned on me that he would not go down to the bottom of the ship. They ended up doing a whitewash investigation using our normal lawyers that we use to even structure these deals. And, you know, he basically just said, look at our plans, make sure icebergs don't matter to us. I didn't know all this. You know, they did pretend they were doing a thorough investigation with me. I didn't know until I testified in front of Congress how limited in scope that it was. But I just didn't see people sounding the alarm bells. I didn't see that crisis management team being formed. I didn't see reality being, you know, accepted. And then 9/11 happened. It was all a very bleak time. I did get the typical whistleblower treatment where I was moved from the executive floor down to the 16th floor, not given any real work, or offered a position that was directly under the chief accounting officer that I was accused of being part of the, you know, fraud problem. It was just a bizarre time because I really felt a sense of relief that when I spoke truth to power, when I kind of met with Ken Lay, I'd had some sleepless nights, met with him, gave him all this information, I walked away with a sense of relief, you know, that I'd sort of done my duty, you know, given him this information that he needs to know. And then to see people ignoring truth, not doing the right thing, then 9/11 happening, and then mid-October, Enron writes off the structures I was talking about, but in a way that you can't do. They called it a non-recurring, non-cash unwind of a previously disclosed related party transaction. Yeah, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to people. And then there was lots and lots of speculation. Our stock price started to decline. The Wall Street Journal hit us with 3 expose articles. I think they had a whistleblower that was giving them information, but they were too chicken to write articles about it until Enron drove themselves into a ditch. But the Wall Street Journal doing those 3 days in a row of articles, the SEC started an informal investigation. Finally, the board wakes up and starts to investigate accounting concerns. But all throughout the fall, I had an in-house lawyer telling me I was all wet, I shouldn't go out on a limb with what I was saying. I would get nasty comments. An in-house lawyer said, well, I don't think you need to look under your car for a bomb or anything. And I thought to myself, well, I would have never thought that. But now that you've brought that into the room, you know, that makes me a little nervous. I was really feeling kind of all alone with my concerns. So Enron actually declared bankruptcy in early December. They laid off 5,000 people 3 weeks before Christmas, you know, with nothing, no severance, no anything. I thought I was actually walking out the door too, but an in-house lawyer kind of saved my job because he was having me meet with the law firms that were defending Enron, the executives, and the board. And then in January, a congressional staffer found my memos in a box of documents, released them to the press. They did some direct subpoenas around my memos, and there was sort of this sense that, aha, we knew there was more rot because the executives at Enron were kind of circling the wagons and pointing to our CFO and saying, wow, look, he lied to us, he lied to you, you know, we're victims too. But that just wasn't ringing true with people. It did seem like the rot was more pervasive. So this report came out early February, and they said everything I had said was true and even more. They talked about this unprecedented conflict of interest that the CFO had, that the Raptor transactions had little economic substance. Enron was just passing one risk from one pocket to another. The disclosures weren't adequate, and they blamed everybody, absolutely everybody. They said the blame rests with in-house lawyers, in-house accounting and business executives. outside lawyers, Anderson, and the board of directors. It was such a sigh of relief for me because finally there was, a group of experts that was saying what I was saying. It was quite a relief. I say this now because I do think the new legal support for the whistleblower that has come about because of Dodd-Frank will provide this kind of support for whistleblowers now, and it was quite an emotional relief for me. So what happened at Enron? I just was asked to go to Tokyo in early October. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners had hired Andy Fastow to speak. He's now going around the country and around the globe talking about rules versus principles. He holds up his prison card and his CFO of the Year award and says he got both for doing the same thing. And he says it in a way that people are like, wow, how weird, but they believe him. Well, he got his prison card because the Department of Justice knew all the details about what he was doing. He got the CFO award just like the reason people invested in the stock market. Enron stock, he was manipulating the financial statements. They did not know all the details. And he goes into the ambiguity in the rules, a focus on the rules. But Andy is part of this phase 4. He potentially he purposely looked for ambiguity, looked for ways of twisting the rules to meet his goals, and then dared Arthur Andersen to prove where he had technically violated a rule. So Enron really moved into this 4th stage of totally abandoning accounting principles or any kind of financial reporting principles and used the rules to meet their goals. This is one structure. I'm only putting it up there just to show you the complexity. This is one $4 billion debt deal, and the little green shaded areas are the only non-Enron entities. This is very complex for one structure, and Enron did this on purpose. If you kept asking questions, they would really have this intimidating tone to their voice and say, look, we've hired the sharpest accountants and the sharpest finance minds in the country. The implication was, you're really going to keep asking questions and show how stupid you are? So smart people just kind of got intimidated into not asking questions. Nobody looks at the financial statements when you're busy working at a company. I didn't look at the financial statements. If I had, I would have seen this. Bethany McClane at Fortune magazine saw this. I don't want to bore you with numbers. It's just going to be a quick look-see. But you see our quarterly net income in 2000 is positive every quarter with a yearly number of right under $1 billion, 979. Our cash flow from operations should be positive. You take your net income and add back depreciation. Instead, it's a huge negative number in the first quarter, negative in the second, slightly positive in the third, and then $4.8 billion in the fourth quarter. This smacks of fourth quarter engineering to make the annual numbers look good. And this is what Bethany McClane was looking at, and she wrote an article in Fortune magazine called Is Enron Overpriced in the spring of 2001, looking at this stuff. Well, she was basically saying the emperor might not have clothes, but people don't like to take pot shots at the emperor. It just didn't get any legs, it didn't gain any traction, and Enron just kept going. They flew up, they pressured Fortune magazine, they met with Bethany McClane. They really acted like she was an idiot and didn't know what she was talking about. But the numbers were there, it's just hard to bring down the emperor. So what was wrong? Diffusion of responsibility, I'm not an accountant, that intimidating kind of way that Skilling just acted like you didn't get it if you were asking good questions. We also had a pretty fierce rank and yank review system. It was, what have you done for Enron lately? So smart people just stopped asking questions because they had to get busy closing deals. They had to move on to the next project. We also outsourced our control department. We had outsourced internal audit, and we'd pretty much emasculated our risk management business. That's just hugely problematic. The students today were asking, what was Enron like to work for? It was very entrepreneurial, it was very fast-paced, it was very fun, and they did great boondoggles. I went on 2 ski trips a year. This was with the faculty that I was talking about. I didn't tell the students this, but we'd rent homes in Beaver Creek, you'd bring customers up. You not only had a chef that fixed you whatever you wanted for breakfast, he would be there for dinner, but you could also go out to dinner if you wanted. We also had masseuses when you came off the slopes so you could get a massage. But we'd also have ski instructors that would show up at the house, as we were heading to the slopes and say, okay, who's blue, who's black? Steve is taking the black skiers, I'm taking the blue. And you got to cut the lines. When you're with an instructor, you go to a separate line. You're skiing all over the mountain, with instructors all day long. I did that twice a year for my last year at Enron, I just went on one ski trip. But, that kind of thing, it does incentivize you to just stop asking questions. You're being treated so well. And that was part of the board's problem. Enron's board of directors was paid $350,000 a director. Flown in on the corporate jets, wined and dined. So you get $350,000 to maybe, at best, go to 8 meetings in a year, or at worst. The board members were wealthy people, but you can kind of leave your own money alone and just live off that. It made, the average of the time for Enron's peer group was like $130,000. It made the board members feel like Enron's management really could spin straw into gold. There was a whole report from the Senate on them, and they condemned the board for allowing Enron to enter into these risky, highly structured finance deals, the conflicts of interest. The board had to waive the code of conduct twice to let Andy form this investment partnership that was at the heart of Enron's fraud. It's just mind-numbing that they allowed this. So what was it, that caused Enron's problems? I am writing a second book on my faith journey, but I've been saying that now for 5 years, and I need to get to it. But I'm using both these quotes. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, "We do not err because truth is difficult to see. It's visible at a glance. We err because this is more comfortable." Well, I would have just kind of gone, huh, what? Because I'm kind of a black and white person. Truth is truth. What do you mean it's more comfortable to really ignore truth? And it's because the oppressor of truth does not go, oh, great, you caught me. They do the equivalent of a smack to the forehead that's got you on your back. I'm going to come back to the second quote, but in all the litigation that happened with Enron, there were other people that had come before me that had protested the conflict of interest or protested the structures themselves, and they had been demoted or ignored. Cliff Baxter was this wonderful guy that got ignored and resigned, and he's the one that killed himself in January of 2002. And his suicide note said, where there was once great pride, now there's none. The board of directors was asking questions, and they're the top dog. And if you're a board member and you're asking questions and you continue to get the runaround and you don't get your questions answered, you need to resign. But basically, Enron was ignoring the bad news. Now, our core values were respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. And we had banners hanging from, the lobbies. You had magnets, desk toys, little things in every conference room to talk about our core values. And the quote, the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, was underneath every communication comment. Our lives begin to end the day we remain silent about things that really matter. How many people stayed silent at Enron? But this quote is actually really, really tragic. And it's tragic because what does it really mean? Something's very important and you've rationalized staying quiet. You've rationalized that you're safer or better off being quiet. Well, a piece of your soul starts to erode, and when you're at the end of your life and it feels like your life's been somewhat purposeless and meaningless, you realize it goes back to that decision where you decided to stay silent. And I know too many people that kind of rationalize that the Department of Justice just got aggressive or started looking, it was popular to prosecute white-collar crime. But it's very important to say something. We had a lunch conversation about, would I do something differently? One of the faculty said that he's talked to whistleblowers and they almost all say they paid too high of a price and they don't know if they would do it again. But I think the problem is they're comparing their post-whistleblowing life with their pre-ethical dilemma life. So they're thinking about how things were before the ethical dilemma landed on their desk. But once the ethical dilemma lands on your desk, you have to make a choice. And they chose to say something, and life has been rough. And they're comparing it to how life was before the ethical dilemma. But really, they need to compare it to what would your life be like if you had rationalized staying silent? And how would you really feel about yourself living with that rationalization? And really, deep down at your core, you wouldn't be happy with yourself. You know, you spoke up, you were courageous. You know, deep down, you might have paid a big price, but you're proud of yourself for doing that. You know, it's not fair. It's not just that you had the ethical dilemma cross your plate, but it did. So I quite often use the deer in the headlight example. You know, the deer is, what's this? What's this? It doesn't necessarily look good. It's a bright light. You know, they're mesmerized by it. They stay in the road and they get smushed dead. When something crosses your plate, I think I made a mistake in going it alone. Seek peer support. You know, you're likely to find others that feel the same way. Go in as a group, but do something. You know, don't go along. It's so easy to be like that deer and just say, well, I don't quite know what to do, and what should I do? And, you know, the ethical dilemma is going to sweep you along. And I know far too many friends that are felons because they just didn't protest. I can come back to this when it gets to the whistleblowing situation, but, you know, the friends that are felons, the Department of Justice was looking for three things: that you were an executive that sold stock, so you benefited from Enron's high stock price, you knew there was fluff in your numbers, and you made public statements to potential investors contrary to your knowledge. So if you look down, obviously Kinlay was asleep at the switch. He got convicted for things he did after I met with him and after other people warned him of problems. I consider Jeff Skilling and Andy Fastow like the swindlers in the Emperor's New Clothes. They were really the flawed leaders that perpetrated the fraud. Ben Glisson, Michael Copper, they were kind of Andy's henchmen. But most of these other people were really the deer in the headlights. The business unit people are great folks. They might have just had an earnings target of $100 million. They actually were going to make 96. At Enron, you couldn't miss your earnings target. So they sold an asset to Andy for, you know, a $4 million profit and made their earnings target. You know, you just don't want to go along. Here are the folks that are felons that had probation. The bottom initials mean that you settled with the SEC, neither confirming nor denying wrongdoing. Still not good on your resume, really. You know, there were, you know, Merrill Lynch bankers and NatWest bankers that went to prison for their dealings with Enron. And then there were a lot of civil fines for the banks, shareholder suits. You know, it was really a mess. So what are the takeaways from this? I think you need to cultivate or kind of seek out organizations that make it easier to admit something's gone wrong. I really think it's just in our nature to make excuses or try to blame shift. You know, go back to Adam and Eve. You know, Adam. You know, God says to Adam, "Did you eat that apple?" He doesn't say yes. He says, "Well, it was the woman you made me." So I think that's just indicative of what's in our human nature. We don't want to have done something wrong. But it really covers a whole, you know, it can be absorbed within a whole organization. Charles Mackay was a Scottish historian from the 1800s. I like his quotes, you know, men go mad in herds but recover their senses slowly one by one. But I really like his quotes on error, that once you've kind of adopted an erroneous position, truth gets the intruder's welcome. And I have found that to be the case. And, you know, what do you do with an intruder? You do try to shoot him in the head. You know, so the whistleblower gets shot, you know, truth gets denied. How do you build an organization that allows bad news to get to the top? I'm going to come back to the whistleblower protections in a minute. But, you know, what should you look for in an organization? One, your leaders do need to have pristine ethics. What I failed to realize is that, all the chinks in Kinlay's armor were very significant. He used the corporate jets for private purposes to a degree that it was kind of gossip, employee gossip. He made us all use his sister's travel agency. It was incompetent and high cost. It's hard to imagine having to go through a travel agency to travel, but back in the 90s, there was really no, going on US Air's website and booking a flight. He was telling the executives, look, I'm at the top, I'm moving company assets to me or my family. They got the message. Andy Fastel heard it loud and clear. We did not have good ways for bad news to get to the top. Really, the messenger was shot. If anyone was no longer, it turns out that the HR department, if they got any kind of complaint and the person was not currently employed at Enron, they chunked it in the trash and just considered it a disgruntled employee. They didn't even investigate, what was in the report. If you were great with customers, great with producing earnings, you could violate Enron's policies and still remain employed. That was problematic. And there really weren't good informal channels for the leaders to hear bad news. I think that's very important. When I was at Arthur Andersen, and I think it was still being well run, you'd see the leaders have these kind of focus groups that would include first-year staff, seniors, and managers that they'd meet with once a month for half a year. And then after they finished with that group, they would get 6 new ones to do that with. So they could just hear what's the scuttlebutt, what's the water cooler talk, what's going on, building trust and rapport that this is a safe environment, you can bring up anything. But good leaders do develop those informal lines of communication. For yourself, if you are challenged, do seek peer report, do seek some peers to see, what else they feel about it. But I have this 3M test, and that means if you would be embarrassed to discuss a transaction with a mentor you most respect and admire, it's problematic. If you wouldn't want it on the front page of the media, it's problematic. And then the last one is the catch-all. If you didn't want your mother to find out about it, you should do something. So say something, do something. Now, I also counsel, speak your truth to power, put it in writing, but don't get married to fixing it. You can't change the value system unless you're the leader. You speak truth to power, and then it's up to them to do the right thing. So what about whistleblowing right now? It's been horrible for whistleblowers. The truth is there's usually loss of job, loss of marriage, loss of health, loss of house and friends. Steve Arbogast had some statistics in his class yesterday that I visited about the tactics that those in power will do. And if they can't just fire you outright, if they can't really put you in a financial strain, they will start spreading rumors. And that happened to me. They try to start spreading rumors. I think for me, they were trying to say I was a man-hater, or it was sort of a shotgun approach of trying different things. One of their lawyers was saying, well, she's no kook, but you see what that means. It's kind of like saying, well, he's no wife beater, but you've brought it up. You put that wife beater word out there. So it was all these things that were still negative, trying to dismiss the whistleblower. With Sarbanes-Oxley Act, businesses pushed back about the whistleblower provisions. That regulation, that new law, got shoved into the Department of Labor, and they convinced the Secretary of Labor that if the whistleblower was not employed by the publicly traded parent, the law did not provide protections for that employee. So much so that in a 6-year period, out of 1,200 cases where people brought up problems, got fired, and they filed a SOX whistleblower case, 841 were dismissed on the technicality that the employee was not employed by the publicly traded parent. When Wall Street collapsed, Congress went looking for Wall Street whistleblowers out of this 841. And they found one at Citibank and Lehman Brothers. And so they got really agitated. Like, could we have prevented the collapses of 2008 Had these folks been listened to in 2005 and 2006 instead of being fired, and we didn't even give them any protections. So what happened was Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank gives a 10 to 30% bounty on the SEC fines for financial wrongdoing. It is really amazing. It got put in place in 2010, and the country is becoming awash in law firms that have opened up whistleblower advocacy groups. They can get paid now. The whistleblower usually has that loss of job, they're in a financial strain, they don't have an ability to even know how to find the right lawyer. Well, now there's great resources. Whistleblower.org singular, whistleblowers.org plural, great books that are out. You know, to me, I felt such relief when I had that Powers report that backed up everything I was saying. The loneliness of blowing the whistle is now, you know, quickly alleviated when you have smart, sharp lawyers, you know, that are now helping you on the idea that they're going to get paid out of this bounty program. I put a third book up here called The Naked Corporation. It's actually like a 10-year-old book, but it says in this new age, and it's got some additions, but with WikiLeaks, with the internet, in this new age, it says, if you're going to be naked, you better be buff. But the point being that if corporations are doing wrong things, they are going to get caught. You know, you really don't want to start a policy of sweeping things under the rug anymore. There's a new thing with Dodd-Frank, that you can actually be part of the problem. You can be within the accounting department, helping to book wrong entries, come to Jesus and decide you don't want to do that anymore, and you can try to correct it within your company. If they don't correct it, you can go to the SEC and you can still get the 30% bounty program, because they really want the wrongdoing to surface to the top. I spoke at an ABA conference last month, and they said that anyone can report it. So they said corporations keep fighting it, but they don't realize that if wrongdoing is brought up internally, the head of the audit committee of the board could decide he's just going to report it. And you get to stay anonymous. No one ever knows you did it. It's very, very helpful. So I think it is a different world. I'm very happy about it. But here's the problem we still face. I'll just read this to you because it is kind of tiny print. With all this stuff with Dodd-Frank, Richard Levick is the head of a crisis management firm. He wrote, the whistleblowers who are most credible and who can therefore hurt you the most are genuinely appalled by whatever misprison they've learned about. Their driving intent is to see the problem corrected. Now that sums up most corporations' attitude towards whistleblower. The whistleblower that can hurt you the most is the one that's trying to help you the most. You know, they really don't like this problem. They want to see it fixed. The attitude towards whistleblowers still has a long way to go, but it is moving in the right direction, that is for sure. So, what to look for in employees, really in companies to invest in? I really pay attention to what the CEO says. I want to see a CEO that's always talking about his culture, his employees, his products, his services, and one that never talks about shareholder value or making their company attractive to investors. You really want to see a CEO that just loves the products and services of their organization, you know, loves what they're doing, you know, has a great admiration for the employees that make it happen. And you're more than halfway home in either working for a company like that or investing in a company like that. It is the tone at the top. You get snippets into the windows of their soul by what they say and what they do, and you pay attention to those things. We've got some time for question and answer. My last little warning is just, you know, why do sayings like the frog in boiling water, that story, why do they exist? It's really the case. And if you heard that the frog thrown in boiling water will leap out to save himself, but if you put him in cool water and slowly heat it, he becomes lethargic and can't jump out. That means it's all about those rationalizations. The first time your gut bothers you, you've got to do something about it. Because the second you start to rationalize that you need to think about it, study it, there might be a point to why it's being done, you know, you've become comfortable in the lukewarm water that's soon to be hot, and you lose your energy to jump out. It is those small steps in the wrong direction, and you have to pay attention early. So the best organizations just value their culture, their value system. They pay attention to those small things, and they jump on it quickly. So let me just finish with that, and let's open it up to question and answer. Okay, got a question up here.
You started by saying that Enron was formed from the merger of two regulated companies. Have you drawn any lessons or conclusions about deregulation in business?
Did everyone hear that? It was the merger of two regulated gas pipeline companies. Deregulation is sometimes sticky. I think it can be, if done right and with the right market analysis, sometimes it's the right thing. Jeff Skilling, his claim to fame was really helping to start a gas bank and the deregulation of gas as a regulated price. And that did add a lot of efficiency. I know that the deregulation of the airline industry, I fly from Houston to New York a lot cheaper than I used to, decades ago. I like some deregulation, but it has to make sense. Electricity doesn't make sense. It's not really a commodity that you can ship from California to New York. I worry sometimes about, an overzealous deregulation of certain industries. It doesn't, Enron's problems were flawed leadership and then pushing too hard and taking advantage of California's halfway deregulated environment. If you saw the movie Smartest Guys in the Room, it kind of discusses the fact that electricity is probably not the best thing to be deregulated. I don't know that, it's not really within my expertise, but I still blame the issues at Enron with the leadership.
What do you think, what process could the board of directors put in place to be better informed on what was going on?
This was a question on what the board of directors could do to be better informed. And the easiest thing for a board of directors to do is develop informal lines of communication with certain heads. Like the head of the audit committee should be going to lunch with the head of risk management and the head of internal audit once a month. And for years, it might just be a lunch. But the one time, that the head of risk management says, okay, you've got a board meeting coming up in 2 weeks, you didn't hear it from me, but I want you to ask these 5 questions when they present this particular transaction. There's trust. There's a feeling that I can tell you that, and you're not going to, say where you heard this. You're just going to look really smart. Wow, those are insightful questions. But those informal lines of communication is where you're going to hear bad news and be able to deal with it. And I think that's the best thing for board members.
I noticed Leah Fastow on the list of the felons. She's a spouse. What did she do to cause the jail time?
So Lee Fastow went to prison for 1 year. She was a Kellogg graduate. She was assistant treasurer at Enron. She stopped working when she had 2 children. But Andy Fastow first did some off-balance sheet structures. He didn't have the permission to do LJM. LJM was when the board of directors waived the code of conduct and Andy formed a $500 million investment firm. He was a general partner. He raised $500 million of limited partner money, and he did business with Enron. Just a crazy setup. But before he got permission to do that, he actually set up some friends of Enron in off-balance sheet structures and did some things that made money for that structure, and they were giving gifts to their kids. So $10,000 checks to Lee and Andy's kids, and then when they had more money than they knew what to do with, they hired Lee as an executive assistant and paid her like $63,000 a year, but there was no real job. She wasn't doing any kind of role. Pretty minor in the scheme of things, but Andy was charged with 99 criminal counts, and he was not cooperating. He had the money to fight it. He'd hired a sharp set of lawyers, and they wanted him to cooperate so they could get Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling. And so they charged her with tax evasion and other problems because she did have her fingerprints on some of this stuff. And so and they were threatening that they were going to put them both in prison at the same time and your kids are going to be orphaned. And so it made them both come in. And she ended up with 1 year. So, yes.
As you know, there's a Harvard Business School case about Enron in which the terms originator and trader occur frequently. Originators, my sense is, were the people you described who were motivated and incentivized to be innovative in creating new kinds of deals. In your view of all of this, to what extent were many of those innovations really quite legitimate, value-creating business transactions, as opposed to these unusual transactions that caused you to be concerned?
Yes. Well, Enron was a highly innovative company. He's asking about, it sounds to me like, did we ever do anything good? Instead of just all the rot. But we did. I mean, the gas bank and the gas trading were innovative ideas. We really were out in front of the NYMEX, helping to get those markets created. The stuff that Enron was initially looking at broadband, was innovative. It's what Netflix does today. When I was talking to the students, I said, it was fun to work at Enron because you really could get a budget and start to pursue a business idea. But I said it was a bit like Formula One race car driving. It's fast, it's fun, but it's actually not as risky as you think because they have flameless fuel, a flame retardant jumper that you wear, the crash box, the helmet. You come in and you change your tires after so many laps. There's a lot of control around fast-paced business activity, Formula One race car driving. Enron, in effect, was a Formula One race car driver that decided, let's not do tire changes, we'll just take the risk. We want to win this race. Let's remove the crash box, it'll make us lighter, we'll just be careful around the curves. They just started to emasculate their risk management, outsource their internal audit, just did not respect and value the control and risk management functions that are critical within an organization. And so people wasted money in broadband. $1 billion just went out the door on some Sun servers that were going to be obsolete by the time we got them all hooked up. So they were sort of, you just don't let young people just run with it without some supervision. And the problem in the trading world, traders are very predatory. They're motivated to get every ounce of blood out of their counterparty. And you have to have the right supervision around them because they'll do, if unsupervised, or in Enron's case, when they're promoted to management, they'll do what Enron did in California, which is to be so predatory they bankrupted their two major counterparties in California. So you don't want to be so predatory you kill your customers. Enron, you're in a trading shop. I mean, this sounds a little graphic, but you're really meant to keep those traders in a cage. You pay them very well, but they stay in a cage. You don't promote them outside the cage to management. And Enron promoted them outside the cage to management. So we've got in the back there.
You were recommending your book cover this whole matter, which would be the first choice?
You mean on Enron?
Yes.
I think the movie, The Smartest Guys in the Room, is very good because you watch it and in 2 hours you kind of get the feeling. I like Alex Gibney. He's a director that tries to interview the people that kind of got sucked into it, where he interviews young traders, young people. One guy even says, hey, look, if I'm on my way to being reviewed and I can stomp on your neck and that's going to push me into the next level higher, I'm going to stomp on your neck. You get the sense of this cutthroat culture. But I also think this middle book, the Whistleblower's Handbook, is very good. If someone's within an organization, the books and the websites kind of say, so you're thinking about blowing the whistle. Let's walk through your situation. There's really some helpful guidelines on some of these websites. Yes.
In your new capacity, if you had been called on by UNC in its recent scandal and whistleblowing scandal, what advice would you have given the university?
Really, it has not, it didn't make it all the way down to Texas. I've heard a lot about it in the 2 days I've been here so far. But, you know, you see, I think universities are better at trying to address it. I mean, I think human nature is to give truth the intruder's welcome. So you have to fight against that. But I see universities tackle ethical problems so much quicker. I think I was talking to the dean about, and he was just saying brand. It's a brand, and you really are valuing your brand. So I think that they just, it might seem like it's taking a long time or it was problematic or it might have been mishandled, but compared to business, it wasn't. It really was addressed, you know, faster than you might think. You want bad news to get to the top. You want ways for things to be reported. Well, it was, but I'm talking about from when it was known to now and what the reaction is. You know, so it might have gone unknown for 10 years, but I mean, it happens a lot. Flawed research stuff. You're not alone, and I think once it became public, it seems like it was, you know, addressed in a way that's pretty proactive. Yeah, it's probably more personal to y'all than you realize. It has not damaged your brand, and you're in the right direction. I see too many businesses that, I mean, Enron was trying to get away with blaming Andy Fastow and never coming clean. There's a sense in this country that there were real problems on Wall Street, and we still haven't addressed it. You know, if you've admitted that something's wrong and you're trying to address it, that is half the battle. And Wall Street's still not fixed. On
one of your slides, you indicated that you also presented yourself to Anderson with the issues. What was their response?
Well, before I went to meet with Ken Lay, I called Jim Hecker, who was a partner at Anderson, who had been a mentor of mine. And I went through the Raptor transactions with him and went through some of the specifics. And he said, well, rest assured that, you know, for these structures to work at all, there has to be outside equity money at risk, and they have to get their investment back last. And that was not the case. And when I explained the situation to him, he said, well, it's flawed, it's not working, rest assured you should go to Ken Lay, it doesn't work. Now then he went and held some meetings within Arthur Anderson to say, hey, you know, I think his title of his memo was The Smoking Gun That Won't Go Out. You know, like we're almost like the jig is up, we're gonna, you know, things are gonna crash. Anderson started to get a backbone, but you know, it was kind of too little too late. You know, a 10Q was never filed for that third quarter. They tried to say we couldn't write it off the way we were doing it. But I'll still never understand what happened to Arthur Anderson. In their trial, it came out that they considered Enron their riskiest worldwide client. Yet it also came out that in their peer reviews of the engagement partner and his team, they considered the team a 2, and 5 was the best for technical proficiency and a really good audit team. 1 was the worst. So why do you allow a 2 team to be on your riskiest worldwide client? So,
A personal question about, doesn't have to do with the case. Ken Lay expired on July 4th, 2006.
mm-hmm.
Reported at the time that he died of natural causes. Do you have a judgment about that?
So I don't know if y'all heard the question, but it's basically, is Ken Lay really dead?
It was Independence Day that he contributed
Yeah.
to his independence by taking his life.
Yeah, so, yeah, the question is, did he contribute? And I actually think he probably did contribute to his death, only because there's many circumstances that are very questionable. He had been found guilty, sentencing had not yet happened. You can't try a dead man, you know, he wasn't going to be able to go through his appeals and all that. So with him being dead, his family was able to keep the last $40 million, you know, that he had. They had 6 houses in Aspen. They had sold them, you know, throughout all this. This was now 2006. they had plenty of friends in Aspen, but they were staying way out in the county just outside of Aspen, where the coroner is just sees less death, there's less population. High altitude does, put you in certain conditions that aren't healthy. But he was not known to have heart problems. He was a pretty fit man. And Linda had him cremated within 24 hours. Family hadn't even flown up. My family happens to own a funeral home, and I also know an executive that runs a funeral home business. And there's just a strong need for people to see the body and say goodbye. So to cremate before children are even flying up to say goodbye is sort of indicative of, take this pill, it's going to cause a heart attack, but an insurance company with a tissue sample is going to find it, so get rid of the evidence as fast as you can. Most people think that's kind of what happened. So, and you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question, because we have a lot of aspiring accountants here today, and some of us are going into audit. And in our audit class, we talked about how tips are really the number one way that fraud is identified. So can you just remark to those of us that are going into the accounting industry, particularly audit, what is our role and what can we expect as our, how effective are we really?
And that's actually a great question. I mean, I am a proponent of internal audit, and really, like, the outside auditors should look at how the system of internal controls and internal audit is working within the company. And I don't think internal controls should be gold-plated, or bulletproof, because that's too costly. But you do need to see that the internal control system is robust enough to identify ethically challenged employees, and that the organization is firing ethically challenged employees. If they keep someone who has violated the control policies, the procedures, the policies, that person's just going to go more underground. They're going to find a way of not being caught. So I think audit should almost, look at how bad news is getting to the top within an organization. Sometimes the Final Four don't really like to hear me say that internal audit should not be outsourced, because they do like to do that for clients. But it's the same reason a board should develop informal lines of communication. If a company has an internal audit department, generally when they're young, there's a lot of interchange, and I might have settled in the internal audit department, but my best friend David is in an operating division. And he calls me up one quarter and says, look, you didn't hear it from me, but when y'all come in to do your review next year, pull these 3 transactions. He feels safe in doing that because we've been friends and colleagues for 5 years. An internal audit, just by its nature, has some nice informal lines of communications within a company that I think helps those tips happen. And I think the outside auditors are outside auditors. There's not that same trust and rapport. But you can audit whether those kind of systems are in place. Let's see.
Could you comment on the practice that is prevalent right now on Wall Street, where large hedge fund managers are taking short positions and laying out many allegations about the improprieties that are taking place in the company, trying to drive the price of the stock down?
Well, I mean, I can't comment. I don't have a lot of specific knowledge about it, but I still don't think we've fixed Wall Street and the drivers there. From Michael Lewis's, current book about the dark pools and things like that, to we don't have a good handle on derivatives and what's happening in that financial world, and it doesn't feel like it's a fair, level playing field. So I think we do need to address oversight of Wall Street and hedge funds. Do we have time for one more question, or is, oh yes, over here.
So I was just curious about why you made the decision to go to Kenlay rather than going to the SEC, especially as, you mentioned these Wall Street Journal articles started coming out and the SEC started doing informal investigations. Kind of what kept you in that role and what kept you from reaching out? Was it kind of that idea that you had of Kenlay as this giver who was really trying to fix it? Or?
Yeah, the question is just like why I went to Kenlay and not outside the company. Well, I went to Kenlay in August after Skilling quit, and I do feel like if a company cooks the books, their best chance of continuing to have life is to come clean yourself. So I was trying to get him to do the right thing. They wrote off the structures I was concerned with, but not in a way that you can do it. You know, the lawyers met with me the day of the earnings announcement, and they were like, well, aren't you happy? We wrote off these Raptor structures. And I said, well, no, you can't do it this way. It's a restatement. You know, you can't do it as a current period write-off. Ken Lay had asked me, you know, have you gone outside the company? Will you give us time to investigate? And I'm like, that's my point of why I'm meeting with you. I want us to do the right thing. Well, October 16th, when they wrote that off, the Wall Street Journal had those articles the next 3 days, and the SEC was investigating by Friday. Well, I did not see, I mean, to me, it's already done. You know, we're dead in the water. The bad news is out there. It's very questionable. There's no correcting it. You know, we were the Titanic with a hole, but now we've blown a bigger hole. I did not see me coming forward as helping. You know, like we were going to sink anyway. I actually just thought my role was done. I mean, I kind of view it more like an Old Testament prophet. I was speaking truth to the king, and then I'm going about my business. I thought I was done because I don't know that to me, the Wall Street Journal made me mad. Like, clearly, you've got great information. Someone gave it to you. Why didn't you use it in August? You know, so I didn't really sense that the financial press was going to help in any way. They were already investigating. And then with the SEC, prior to Dodd-Frank, the SEC did not really have a great reputation either. But we were already sunk. Different people did kind of rise up and say, well, I saw this and I saw that. And it was kind of an interesting phenomenon because we were in the news every day, and we were on CNBC and CNN and the local news. And the people that were raising their hands saying, well, I saw something wrong, they kind of looked like they were wanting the media attention, you know, because the cameras did go follow them and did go get in their face. And I just didn't see where that would have helped. It was kind of a surprise to me when Congress did find my memos in a box of documents and released my name to the press. And it did shake me up and made me very, very nervous. I was still employed. You know, we talked about it. The next day, my husband wakes me up and says, there's camera crews, you know, out in the yard. And it really unnerved me. They were also in the back where the garage is. And I did happen to just pick up my Bible and open it up randomly to this incredible passage in Hebrews 12, 1-3, that you're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. You know, throw off those burdens, keep your eye focused on Jesus, and run the race marked out for you. Very buck-up passage, you know, just go do it. At Enron that day, I was going to a business professional women's lunch, and I got there, it was a Tuesday, and the speaker opened up with the same 3 verses. And it felt kind of heavy, and because I thought my role was done. I'm still looking for a job. You know, I'm still at Enron, but not for long. It was bankrupt. It was in the bankruptcy estate. But it really was kind of a little nudge that it's going to get a little dicey, because that's when I got subpoenaed by the Department of Justice, but, you know, testified in front of 2 congressional investigations, had all the media attention. But I do feel like I triggered a biblical promise that you're here on this earth for a reason. You take a risk for the talents that have been given you, and you know, you see the baseball players in Field of Dreams. It opens up a whole new world. And so things have been really tremendous for me emotionally and spiritually. Not so much financially, but emotionally and spiritually. And so I do think we all have a particular purpose, call, and vocation. And it's worth being courageous in pursuing it. So.
Ms. Watkins, I want to thank you on behalf of the students, the staff, the faculty, and the alumni, not only for this presentation, but also the various meetings you've had with us over the last few days. I found not only the presentation, but our conversation to be very informative and insightful, and of course extremely relevant for a business school. I think it's critically important for all of us to think about the implications that fraud has on the capital markets. I think it's particularly important for our students to think about the role they need to play once they leave here. The smooth functioning of the capital markets requires the integrity of management inside the corporation, and of interest to many of the students here today, our MAC students, we must have competent auditors of high integrity. If investors get to the place where they may have been close to around 2001, 2002, where they no longer trust the communication that firms are providing about their financial position, their financial performance, then our very economic system is at risk. Sherron, I often tell our students that they need to start thinking about the ethical decisions they're going to make and the level of integrity in which they're going to practice before they leave here and before they face the ethical dilemma, because it usually turns out bad at that point. And I think your presentation, your conversations have aided in that thought process for them. So thank you again. Audience, thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great evening.